course of the last couple of weeks before writing this video, I made a 4-part series of videos where I restructured the Multiverse Saga of the MCU, both from what we've already seen, but also all the way up to its conclusion. And in these 2 videos, while I did take some already existing properties and change them up quite a bit, I also had to come up with completely new movies, or give substance to movies that have already been announced. Aside from the 2 Avengers movies, it was the Spider-Man movies where I put in the most effort and time, mostly because Spider-Man is by far my favorite Marvel character, or superhero in general. I know more about him and his lore than any other. He also has a more extensive lore than any other character, especially with his rogues gallery. And in the MCU, Spider-Man is easily the franchise I'm most invested in, especially after No Way Home. So what I thought would be fun to do would be to expand on that with a dedicated Spider-Man video that covers how I would handle the franchise going forward, making it a 20-year-long saga. With that in mind, this video will not technically be an expansion on those restructuring videos, as I want to look at what Spider-Man's franchise could look like going forward realistically. So there will be some changes made to the movies from those videos, and yes, I know that a 20-year-long saga is very unrealistic, if nothing else because either the MCU won't be around at that point, or specifically Tom Holland will probably not want to stick around in the role for that long, but let's just assume that he will. He's going to be like an It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia cast member, sticking to the same character for 20 years, in a series that remains popular for that time and also high quality, and see how that particular saga can unfold, specifically with 2 more trilogies after the ones we've already had. So make sure to subscribe and leave a like, and let's begin. So obviously, when it comes to this 20-year saga, the first 6 years already exist in real life, from Peter's debut at 14 years old in Captain America Civil War, to having an entire trilogy and 2 Avengers movies appearances in a relatively short amount of time. 2021 and No Way Home signal a bit of a break for the webhead for a few years, as it's currently 2023, and Peter's next confirmed appearance, Spider-Man 4, hasn't begun production yet, let alone trailers or release. Optimistically, I think 2025 is probably where the movie will release, even if it's in December like No Way Home, and that is where Spider-Man 4 comes in. In my Phase 5 video, I named this movie Spider-Man Freshman Year as a reference to the animated series that I removed from the schedule, switching the meaning to be about his freshman year at college instead of high school. In the real world, where Spider-Man Freshman Year is an upcoming animated series that will come out, we'll need to change the title of this and its sequel, which was Junior Year, which honestly I'm glad, because not only did I not like those titles, but I also don't think it's realistic for the first movie to take place in his first year of college. Instead, it'll be in his second year at college, because it's going to be at least 2027, maybe even 2028 when this movie takes place. That's because the MCU is currently at the end of 2026, and this movie will have to take place after the entirety of both Echo and Daredevil Born Again. So let's say both of those things take place throughout the entirety of 2027, and then this movie takes place in January/February 2028. But this does leave us without a naming convention, so we're just gonna go generic here, just Spider-Man and then the title of a comic book story or just what the movie's about. So this movie will be called Spider-Man Devil's Reign, named after a very recent comic book event focusing on the recently elected mayor of New York, Wilson Fisk, outlawing superheroes. Ironically, this is not a Spider-Man story, nor does Peter Parker actually show up in it at all, as at the time Spider-Man was Ben Reilly, but we'll be taking the basic concept and using it here. Like it was in the Phase 5 video, Spider-Man Devil's Reign will act as a follow-up and as a finale to the overarching Kingpin plot that started with Hawkeye, went into Echo, and finally Daredevil Born Again, as the protagonists of those shows all show up here and are all joined by the Wall Crawler to take down the recently elected mayor Wilson Fisk. Returning for this movie are 2 villains from Spider-Man Homecoming, now as full comic book villains, Aaron Davis aka the Prowler and Matt Gargan now as the Scorpion, both under the employ of Kingpin and both acting as the primary physical threats for Peter, while the other street level heroes mostly fight hordes of regular people who work for Fisk. Additionally to all of that, Devil's Reign follows up on No Way Home, focusing on Peter's removal from humanity, as while he is in the middle of his second year of college, he has zero social life despite people like Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy attempting to befriend him. This is also made worse by the fact that both Gwen and Osborn are names that are already significant to Peter because of No Way Home, and he knows that both of those things do not end well. But also he's pulled more and more to the Spider-Man side of his life by the newly introduced Felicia Hardy, aka the Black Cat, who is the main love interest of the movie, focusing more on lust or seduction rather than the more typical or healthier love-based relationship like with MJ, who, alongside literally everyone else on Earth, doesn't know who Peter Parker is, or at the very least doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Black Cat's story also connects to the main story backstory as her father worked for and was killed by the Kingpin, and joins the New York Defenders, who are unable to prevent Kingpin's grand plan, who destroys parts of New York City like he did on Daredevil in such a way that he can't be traced back to, which makes him untouchable. However, a very detached from humanity at this point Spider-Man loses control and beats Fisk to death in the darkest yet Spider-Man moment on screen, showcasing his, again, detachment from humanity, which will be the focus of this movie and basically the entirety of the trilogy. Throughout this movie, Michelle Jones and Ned Leeds don't appear outside of maybe a cameo. J. Jonah Jameson has a slightly larger role as Peter decides to make some money by selling him pictures of Spider-Man, as Jonah is revealed to be a lot nicer in real life than we would have expected, certainly nicer to Peter than he is to Spider-Man, who he absolutely despises. No Way Home did also tease the Venom symbiote, and while Peter will exclusively wear the final swing suit in Devil's Reign, the symbiote suit is just around the corner. In fact, the end credit scene of this movie would show Peter being enveloped by the symbiote. In 2026, the Kang Dynasty release, it would be here that the symbiote suit will fully debut, with Peter wearing it throughout the entirety of the Kang Dynasty in Secret Wars. I did come up with plots for both of these movies, but in a world where the Kang Dynasty is the first Avengers movie since Endgame, I believe it'll have far lower stakes and far less all-encompassing for the universe, as it focuses on debuting the new Avengers roster, leaving Secret Wars to be the big Infinity War or Endgame-like event. Still, I do think Spider-Man will be in both of these. There are even rumors that he'll be the lead of one or two of them, but as this is a 20-year saga, he certainly will not die in either. The big Spider-Man related matters out of this is that, for one, the symbiote suit will get a lot of screen time, the primary screen time that it will get in the entirety of the saga, but also the symbiote suit will not affect him all that much. It does make him more powerful, and therefore he excels at being Spider-Man more, but it mostly focuses on Peter, for one, interacting a lot with other Marvel heroes, but also dealing with the fact that he just killed someone in the events of Devil's Reign, so that will be a bit more focused on his disconnect from humanity. However, the symbiote, at least for now, doesn't actually affect his emotions. My version of Secret Wars ended with the Avengers becoming a Justice League Unlimited type situation, with dozens of heroes as a part of the organization. This will remain true here, but Spider-Man specifically will not be a member of the Avengers, not appearing in the small-scale Avengers movies, but yes, appearing in the larger-scale, universe-encompassing Avengers movies that will be at the end of the saga. As Spider-Man, like in the comics, becomes a fourth pillar of the Marvel Universe, there's the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man. They all team up with each other, but they are mostly separate most of the time. Secret Wars also ended with the X-Men being retconned back into the MCU, having been erased from history and memory by a yet unrevealed force that will almost certainly be the big bad of the saga, and that could remain true here, it could not, but I'm going to be keeping that intact because it is important for the next Spider-Man movie, specifically something to do with MJ. That brings us to Spider-Man 5, which in that video was Spider-Man Junior Year. If you've seen the video, then you probably know what I'm going to be calling it this time around, Spider-Man Kraven's Last Hunt, and it will be very similar, but not exactly the same. The biggest difference is that the Fantastic Four, or at the very least both Mr. Fantastic and the Human Torch, will be appearing. This will be a darkly toned movie where Peter does get rid of the symbiote after finding out that it's an alien symbiote with the help of Reed Richards, after he faces off against, easily defeats, and heavily injures Kraven the Hunter and the Chameleon. The symbiote, however, escapes and eventually attaches itself to a almost committing suicide Kraven the Hunter, while Peter struggles with fighting as Spider-Man, specifically in a Last Stand inspired makeshift suit without the symbiote this time, and after breaking up with Black Cat and almost losing to a villain named Vermin, he quits being Spider-Man, especially after a new Spider-Man shows up who is wearing the black suit. Then, kind of like Spider-Man 2, Peter excels at school, starts to become friends with Harry and Gwen, and excels more at his job at the Daily Bugle, with one coworker who is mostly a red herring being Eddie Brock. Unfortunately, Kraven kills Vermin and maybe another villain like Boomerang and begins mutating larger and larger, and so Spider-Man goes after him. Still out of his element, however, Peter is beaten half to death after finding out the new Spider-Man is Kraven, who buries him alive just like the comics. While Kraven is out mutating larger and larger into a larger Venom than we've ever seen on screen, Peter's life flashes before his eyes back through every traumatic event, ending with bringing the MCU Spider-Man full circle, with the debut of Uncle Ben, or rather Peter's subconscious interpretation of him, because it's about time we see this version of Spider-Man's original origin story and original motivation, and in particular, Uncle Ben. Through this subconscious interaction, Peter reconciles with his guilt of Uncle Ben's death while realizing that he must reconnect with humanity even more and must find the balance in his life yet again between Peter and Spider-Man, a balance he has never really had in this universe aside from when he was aided by Iron Man, and especially since his identity was revealed in Far From Home. Peter breaks out, and while Kraven is mutating, the scene from No Way Home in the cafe is recreated. This time, Peter reveals his identity to MJ, which, thanks to Secret Wars, returns MJ's full memories to her, giving Peter a very rare lucky break where he's able to reveal his identity to anyone, it gives them back their memories, and has zero consequences, because I think Spider-Man deserves a lucky break every now and then, and this is a good way to reconnect him with his humanity further. Also, I take the soft reboot opportunity from Secret Wars to make it so that MJ is just Mary Jane Watson, reveal that her mother was a mutant named Mary Jane who abandoned her family in the X-Men-less timeline, which is why MJ changed her name to Michelle Jones. In this timeline, the X-Men's existence inspired Mary Jane to remain, and so her daughter, Mary Jane Watson, never changed her name, because we might as well just make her Mary Jane Watson. Also, she has red hair from now on, because why not? They get back together just in time for a huge mutated Venom to attack New York, which Spider-Man fights alongside the Fantastic Four, with Human Torch specifically becoming close friends with him over the course of this movie and then another one. Eventually, Peter wins by convincing the symbiote to return to him as a trap to contain him using some tech Reed created. On top of that, throughout the movie, after breaking up with Black Cat, Peter is also forced into a rough spot as she slowly returns to crime. The movie also ends with Peter revealing its identity to Ned Leeds, which rekindles their friendship, as Ned is also revealed to have gone back together with Betty Brant. The end credits see the debut of Miles Morales, who's bitten by a radioactive spider. In this fictional world, Spider-Man Kraven's Last Hunt would be the final movie in the Multiverse saga. 2028 would be the start of a new saga, one that focuses heavily on the X-Men and the mystery of who it was who erased them from history and memory, in a saga called the Mutant Saga. When it comes to Spider-Man, the first Mutant Saga project would actually be the sequel to Fantastic Four, a movie called Fantastic Four Future Foundation, or FFFF. Building upon the friendship brewing between Peter and Johnny, as well as Reed Richards' inherent respect for Spider-Man, he's asked to join the Fantastic Four. And although he declines, he does find himself being a key player in the plot of this movie anyway, as a future version of the team calling themselves the Future Foundation have come back in time to prevent the catastrophic death of the Human Torch, which is supposed to cause a fiery blast that destroys half of the world. The Future Foundation includes older versions of Reed, Franklin, Valeria, and Spider-Man, who has joined the team, who wears the black and white Future Foundation costume from the comics. In this alternate future, Ben and Sue also died when Johnny exploded. The event they came to intervene in is a conflict with Annihilus, who is the main villain, and in the end, the Future Foundation sacrificed their life to defeat him, including Spider-Man, who teases the next Spider-Man movie by telling his younger self to be prepared for the Sinister Six. In this movie, Peter will mention that he's recently begun training a partner, a reference to Miles Morales, and as far as Spider-Man is concerned, that's all there is to it. This brings us to Spider-Man 6, which just has to feature the Sinister Six, but not just that. While these movies have included a version of Doc Ock, he wasn't the main villain, nor was he from this universe, nor was he really a villain for very long either. So this version of the Sinister Six, like most are, will be led by Doc Ock, specifically the MCU's Doc Ock, played by a new actor, who will be revealed to be a very important part of Spider-Man's life and has been the entire time. Spider-Man Sinister Six showcases the debut of Miles Morales in full, and as a hero, he'll go by Spin for now, but eventually at the end of this saga will earn the Spider-Man mantle. Peter and Miles are confirmed to have a mildly connected backstory to each other, as well as to Doc Ock, as both of their respective spiders were enhanced by Otto's experiments over the course of the last 15 years, which Otto set loose on the world to test their capabilities, but it did bite the two of them on accident. It could have bit literally anyone, and just so happened to have bitten Peter Parker and Miles Morales. Otto observed Peter for a few years, concluded that it was a success, tried to give himself powers, it didn't work, so then turned to an even more powerful experiment, which led to the spider that bit Miles, giving him additional abilities of invisibility and venom blasts. A third experiment led to Anton Miguel Rodriguez being bitten as well, which while initially successful, it did eventually go wrong, as in an opening fight scene with Peter and Miles taking on Anton, he mutated into a giant tarantula and died. Unbeknownst to Otto, his initial spider actually bit someone else, but we'll get back to that later. For some unknown reason, Otto has been incapable of developing the spider powers for himself, despite being bitten multiple times, which might have just been driving him mad the entire time. At this point, he's borderline insane. So, with the plan of kidnapping the two successful subjects and extracting their powers for himself, Otto builds himself the Octopus Arms, inspired by his alternate universe counterparts, and recruits 5 enemies of Spider-Man's from the last 5 movies. Included here is, for one, from Spider-Man Homecoming, the Vulture, who I'd like to think was returned to his own universe by the Spider Society like Aaron Davis was. Speaking of, I think it'd be a missed opportunity not to bring Prowler from Homecoming and Devil's Reign in this Miles debut movie. Additionally, the Scorpion would return from Homecoming and Devil's Reign as well, one final time, as well as both Kraven from Kraven's Last Hunt and the Chameleon from both Far From Home and Kraven's Last Hunt, who are given the chance to do a bit more of what they do in the comics, with Kraven not being completely useless without the symbiote as a very key member of the team, and with the Chameleon disguising himself as the the other MCU heroes and maybe older versions of Spider-Man to play with this concept a bit more. So basically, you'd have somebody coming back from all 5 of the last movies. You'd have the Vulture from Homecoming, Chameleon kind of from Far From Home, Doc Ock kind of from No Way Home, Prowler and the Scorpion from Devil's Reign, and Kraven as well as Chameleon from Kraven's Last Hunt. In terms of importance to the plot or screen time for each member, I'd go from least important to most important. Scorpion, Kraven, Vulture, Chameleon, Prowler, and Doc Ock is by far the most important as the main villain and leader of the Sinister Six. After learning that the younger Spider-Man is his nephew, Prowler turns on Otto, allowing for the hero's victory over the Sinister Six. However, this turns out to be all a part of Otto's plan, who calculated every move to this exact series of events to lead the fight to a certain location where he's able to trap Peter and transfer his own consciousness into Peter's body, switching their minds. However, as he kept his plan secret from the Sinister Six, and as there's no visual change, no one knows what happened to him. In addition to all of this, after Peter and MJ get back together, Harry and Gwen started dating and have now gotten engaged, with the wedding being something that's happening closely after the events of this movie. And in these scenes, the MCU's Norman Osborn is introduced, which will lead into the next Spider-Man movie. We'll get to that soon. After Otto takes over Peter's body, he doesn't go to the wedding, breaks up with MJ, and quits his job at the Daily Bugle in an attempt to remove himself from the life of Peter Parker, ending yet another trilogy with Peter's life in a state of disarray, or rather this time around, he's legitimately practically dead. On the other hand, Otto does graduate from college and does continue to be Spider-Man, and eventually does also form Parker Industries. We'll get to that in the next movie. As for Black Cat, while she has returned to the life of crime, she does help the Spider-Man fight the Sinister Six. However, after their apparent victory, Felicia leaves New York and potentially the MCU, at least for the remainder of this saga. Taking place basically immediately after Spider-Man Sinister Six, Tiffany Aspenson reprises her role as Cindy Moon from Spider-Man Homecoming and Avengers Infinity War like 10 years prior, in a Silk solo movie called Silk, the Spider Bride. Obviously, it would be produced by Sony but set in the MCU like the rest of the Spider-Man movies. Cindy not being in Far From Home or No Way Home after appearing in Infinity War suggests that, and basically confirms, that she survived the snap and is now 5 years older than Peter. Cindy will be revealed to have been bitten by the same spider that bit Peter, but because it had already bitten Peter, it was verging on death and hanging on just long enough to bite Cindy as well. So the bite was really weak, and whatever went into Peter's bloodstream, a little bit of it went into Cindy, so it took a lot longer for her powers to manifest. When it finally did, during the blip, a man named Ezekiel Sims found Cindy and began to train her. Silk the Spider Bride delves heavily into the spider totem lore, the MCU's version of the Web of Life and Destiny, while setting up the Inheritors, who will be the villains of Spider-Man 8. After Ezekiel's death of old age a few years ago, Cindy opted to live a normal life, but soon finds herself hunted by Bora, a member of the immortal race of Spider-Man hunters, who have recently found out about Cindy's role in the Web of Life as the Spider Bride, whose importance has only recently grown after Peter's apparent death at the hands of Dr. Octopus, which is really only the spider totem people who know about. Soon, Cindy finds herself in an alternate universe with no Spider-Man. Instead, Gwen Stacy is Spider-Woman, played by the same actress who plays her in the MCU. Together, they take down Bora, but are unprepared for the larger looming threat, which is where the movie ends, and that leads into Spider-Man 8. Before that, though, is Spider-Man 7, beginning the third and final trilogy in the Tom Holland-led 9-movie-long saga. This one is an alternate Spider-Man-based trilogy, following the comic book naming convention of The Blank Spider-Man. If you couldn't guess already, this movie will be called The Superior Spider-Man, and focus on Otto Octavius having taken over Peter Parker's body, and has been for a year and a half. Otto has founded an already successful business called Parker Industries, and started dating a woman named Anna Marie Marconi, just like the comics. Trying to prove he's the superior Spider-Man, Otto continues Peter's crusade, but finds himself conflicted between his own ideals and the powerful ideals of what Spider-Man is. In a brain that hasn't been physically corrupted by the many spider bites Otto put himself through, he's basically fully regained his sanity. While Miles secretly investigates Peter for himself because he's acting so differently, the two Spider-Men also come into conflict with the Hobgoblin, or rather a few of them, a Green Goblin-inspired criminal or two who mixes magic and technology, and whose secret identity becomes a web of secrets that the Spider-Men must untangle. Included in this is Ned Leeds, who is framed and arrested for being the Hobgoblin, which Peter clearly doesn't really care much about, which Miles and his other old friends do notice. While being slowly redeemed, Otto is eventually, near the end of the movie, faced with a choice as the magic surrounding the Hobgoblin shows him a vision of a multiversal future event, which involves Spider-Man, but the true Peter Parker is needed. Having been introduced in the prior movie, the MCU Norman Osborn is revealed to be the mastermind behind the Hobgoblin operation, who are revealed to be a few separate individuals, including brothers Roderick and Daniel Kingsley, and Peter's classmate and Otto's current employee, Phil Urich. While trying to figure out what happened to Peter that changed him so drastically, and trying to clear Ned's name, Harry, Gwen, and MJ find themselves getting involved in the Hobgoblin conflict. After they uncover Norman's involvement and confront him alongside the Spider-Man and Oscorp, Norman reveals his true, insane self, who over the course of the last few years, since No Way Home, has been slowly going through a mental breakdown upon learning about his alternate universe self. The fact that that crazy man killed a woman named May Parker and attacked Spider-Man at the Statue of Liberty. In flashbacks, Osborn finds out that Green Goblin killed a woman named May Parker, puts together that Peter is Spider-Man, and decides to simply continue his alternate self's vendetta against Spider-Man. Mixing a serum and the Hobgoblin magic, Osborn turns himself into a Hulk-like goblin monster. Because we already saw the classic Green Goblin in one of these movies, this time around let's go with the ultimate Green Goblin instead. But he doesn't call himself Green Goblin, instead he calls himself the Goblin King. On a play on the Gwen Stacy story, it looks like Goblin King is about to kidnap her. Instead, he kidnaps his own son, Harry Osborn, and drops him off a building, which Otto feels an overwhelming care for. Maybe like the physical chemicals happening in Peter's brain affect Otto, and so he does the less practical thing and jumps after him, and does actually successfully save his life. The two Spider-Men are then attacked by the Goblin King and the three Hobgoblins, and continuing the Halloween theme, which is when this movie will come out in and take place in, other Halloween-themed villains will appear, such as Jack-O-Lantern in a small role, and Man-Wolf in a relatively large role. Man-Wolf is John Jameson, J. Jonah Jameson's son. J. Jonah Jameson will have a large role in this movie as well, as his son, John Jameson, is affected by Hobgoblin's magic and is transformed into the Man-Wolf. In the end, Man-Wolf helps defeat the goblins and sacrifices his life to do so. Having defeated the goblins, Otto also essentially sacrifices his own life by simply allowing Peter's subconscious to retake his body. Maybe it's revealed that Peter has been inside Otto's body the entire time, and he allows him to switch back, just in time for Otto's body to physically die, leaving Peter with the knowledge of the upcoming event and the burden of the social life that Otto has absolutely destroyed. Peter explains everything to everyone, and while Harry and Gwen specifically say they'll need time to process everything, MJ doesn't really and fully embraces it, and in this charged moment, Peter asks her to marry him, and she accepts. Ned is then released, but upon finding out that he was only framed to get at Peter, Ned has had enough and decides to not be a part of this world any longer, leaving Peter and the MCU alongside Betty. I'm sure a lot of you won't like the idea of the MCU Norman Osborn only interacting with Spider-Man when he's Otto Octavius, but the fact that Green Goblin was already the main villain of one movie, even if it was an alternate universe version, and he had a very profound effect on Spider-Man's life by killing May Parker, it's like, can you really do that again? So I think making him the main villain of the superior Spider-Man movie, and making him very different, so he's not based on the classic version, but rather the ultimate version, makes him different enough that it justifies Green Goblin taking up 2 places on the main villain list in these movies, because, well, you could only really have so many main villains in 9 movies. There are a lot of big Spider-Man villains like Electro, Sandman, and the Lizard, who will never be the main villains of any of these movies. Well, you just have to go with it. And that leads into the next movie, which is the Spider-Verse inspired movie, a movie called The Spectacular Spider-Man. This movie would start with Peter's wedding with MJ, which is celebrated by a few of their close friends, but it would mostly be pretty small because he doesn't really have that many close friends. While on his honeymoon, Peter is approached by Silk, while Miles is approached by Spider-Woman, recruiting them into the coming conflict with the Inheritors, which they've been preparing for the last 3 years. Teaming up with an army of alternate universe Spider-Men, Peter and Miles must save the Web of Life and Destiny and the Marvel Cinematic Universe corner of the multiverse's spider totems from the Inheritors, a race of multiverse traveling, spider totem hunting elder gods. But I think it's important to note that this is different from the comic book Inheritors. It's a different corner of the multiverse, but it has different Inheritors, if that makes sense. Taking the Spider-Men on a journey through the multiverse, with many hints here and there to the Spider-Verse movies from 10 to 15 years prior at this point. The alternate universe Spider-Man would include Andrew Garfield, maybe Tobey Maguire, although he'd be in his 60s at this point, so maybe just his daughter Spider-Girl. Also included would be 2099, Gwen, UK, Noir, Punk, Iron Spider, Advanced Spider-Man, Spider-Ham, as well as, and I think this is important, one individual alternate Spider-Man wearing each and every one of Peter's and Miles' old Spider-Man costumes from the MCU, each as a completely different character who just so happens to wear that costume as their main costume. 2 important details are that 1, none of the alternate Spider-Man will be played by Tom Holland, and 2, none of the clones from the comics will be included here because, well, that's what Spider-Man 9 is all about. In the end, after many alternate Spider-Men die, maybe with the big death of this movie actually being Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, although maybe not, that might piss some people off, Tom Holland's Peter's energy is mostly drained by Marlon before saving the day by being infused to the Enigma Force, becoming Cosmic Spider-Man and destroying the Inheritors. However, upon losing this cosmic power, Peter soon learns his powers are beginning to fade permanently due to Marlon's draining him. Although it could take a few years, that specifically would be used in like the marketing for Spider-Man 9, which will be said to be the final Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. Now, the Enigma Force is the canonical opposite to Null, creator of the Venom symbiote, so I think it would make sense to follow up on this movie with that, but while I do think they should get there if this universe continues beyond these 20 years, I won't be talking about that here. I want to end Peter's story in a certain way in a slightly smaller scale movie, as I already mentioned with the clones, and you could get to know later, potentially with Miles as Spider-Man. Also, MJ finds out she's pregnant, which we will follow up on in a bit. To set up Null for a potential Spider-Man 10 or a Miles Morales-led Spider-Man movie, between the two last Spider-Man movies would be Agent Venom. The US government got their hands on the symbiote and bonded it to a recently wheelchair-bound Flash Thompson, who's been absent for the saga for a few years now, and who joined the military after flunking out of MIT. With the symbiote substituting for his legs, Flash becomes Agent Venom. The mutant saga would end around this point, with another two-parter connected movie, with the first being an X-Men movie featuring the Avengers, and the other being an Avengers movie featuring the X-Men. I do not have a general concept beyond that, mostly because it's not really relevant to Spider-Man, so I haven't really thought about it. But Peter, Miles, Cindy, and then also Flash would all interact with each other and the other MCU heroes, which would certainly be very different at this point compared to Secret Wars, especially with the X-Men being there. Aside from that, Peter's kids would debut here, twins named Anthony Benjamin and Maybelle Parker, named after Tony Stark, Uncle Ben, and Aunt May, whose name is Maybelle, not Mayday, so that's her name here. And of course, the two Spider-Men would almost certainly have large roles, even if it doesn't affect their lives too much. And finally, that brings us to the final project I'll be discussing, the 9th and final Tom Holland-led Spider-Man movie, releasing in 2036, 20 years after his debut in the MCU, is The Ultimate Spider-Man. In this movie, Peter finds himself struggling with balancing the duties as CEO of Parker Industries, which he soon leaves behind to be a teacher, a father to two 2-year-old kids, and as Spider-Man, all while the two Spider-Men find themselves in the middle of a cloning plot that has been going on for the past decade, led by obsessed scientist Miles Warren, aka the Jackal, the main villain of this movie, introducing clones of Peter, including a feral beast named Doppelganger, who is more of a physical threat in this movie, a female variant who calls herself Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, inspired by the ultimate version of the character, who I think is the best version of the character, and a blonde variant who could easily pass as Peter's brother, but would not be played by Tom Holland. He calls himself Ben Reilly, aka the Scarlet Spider. Also introducing Chasm, taking Ben Reilly's current name from the comics, a violent Miles Morales clone who goes by Kane Davis, inspired by the second, I think it was, Spider-Man clone from the comics, who was Peter Parker. This time around, it will be Miles Morales, because I think that will be a bit more interesting. Either joining in or fighting against the Spider-Man, the clones and non-clones alike, like Agent Venom and Silk, become a part of a larger spider conflict that will spell the end of Peter Parker's superhero career, specifically with growing weaker and weaker since what is now called the Spider-Geddon. Peter's powers fully fade by the end, freeing him of his great power and thus his great responsibility. As he takes up another responsibility, fatherhood, Peter officially passes the mantle of Spider-Man to Miles Morales, who up until this point has been going by Spin, and leaves New York in the capable hands of Scarlet Spider, Chasm, Spider-Woman, Agent Venom, and Spider-Man. And so, in his 20th year as Spider-Man in the year 2036, Tom Holland, who at this point is 40 years old, and with Peter turning 30 on screen in this movie, Spider-Man Saga would conclude.